think so, no.
So right now the boat's being seized?
Oh, shit.
Did you catch that last line? Oh shit.
Welcome to the Northern Bureau up here in Canada. I have some incredibly big news to bring you today, and honestly, a video that I have been absolutely dying to show you. I managed to get my hands on some highly exclusive Coast Guard video. You know how that whole Freedom of Information Act thing works, right? When you formally ask the government for stuff, they will often give it to you unless there is a very specific legal reason not to. Well, I wanted to know exactly what it looked like 40 miles off the coast of Florida when the Coast Guard went racing out there with all of its massive assets, intercepted the sailboat named Soulmate, and seized that vessel from the two commercial transport captains who were bringing it back from the Bahamas. They were doing this presumably because Brian Hooker wanted his boat back in American waters. I have been so desperate to see this footage because in my head, I kept imagining it like a real-life episode of Cops on the Water. You picture a massive Coast Guard vessel flying across the waves with the sirens blaring, the flashing lights reflecting off the dark water, and an officer shouting through the loudspeaker for them to pull over. I could just see it all playing out in my mind like a Hollywood movie. But now, I don't have to just imagine it anymore, because I actually have the real footage right here for you. This is the exact moment that the Coast Guard Investigative Service, alongside Coast Guard tactical members based out of Florida, came upon two completely unsuspecting commercial transfer captains. Now, let's be totally fair to these guys. These men were just delivery captains who had been hired and paid to bring the boat across the ocean from the Bahamas to Florida. This kind of arrangement happens all the time in the maritime world. These captains had absolutely no idea that they had been actively surveilled electronically from the air by planes and from the water by cutting-edge tracking systems. They weren't just being watched by people like me who follow these cases, but they were being heavily monitored by the United States Coast Guard. When the tactical team decided it was finally time for that high seas interdiction, the real-world confrontation was intense. You can hear the authorities demanding to know how many people are on board, shouting across the water to ask if there are any weapons, and warning the crew not to reach for anything. The delivery captains, completely stunned, quickly answer that there are no weapons and nobody down below. When asked if they are heading to St. Augustine, they explain they are actually taking it to Fort Pierce Beach for the owner, though they don't think the owner is even meeting them there. And then comes the heavy blow from the Coast Guard officer who flatly informs them that, as of that exact moment, the boat is being officially seized by the United States government. The immediate reaction from the delivery captain is just a stunned exclamation of shock. I really want to drill down and analyze that specific reaction for a moment because I think a lot of people jumped on this footage when it first leaked and immediately assumed that these commercial delivery captains were somehow complicit in some ugly, illegal business on behalf of Brian Hooker. But from what I am gathering from my extensive network of sources, that is simply not the case. I talk to people in the Bahamas all the time. I talk to local Bahamian law enforcement, federal law enforcement in America, and directly to contacts within the Coast Guard. I am getting the very distinct impression that these higher-on captains were completely in the dark. Yes, it is absolutely true that we had sources in the Bahamas who told us many weeks ago. In fact, we are looking at about week 6.5 of this ongoing investigation right now, that Brian Hooker was actively shopping around the islands, looking for any delivery captain and crew willing to take the contract to sail that boat back to the United States. We know for a fact that most reputable captains in the area were flatly denying the request and refusing to take the job. They knew there was a dark cloud of lore surrounding that vessel. They knew there was some seriously weird energy and unanswered questions attached to the boat, but the guys who finally took the job didn't truly believe it was anything more than just a typical paid transport gig like the ones they perform every single day. Boats move back and forth between the US and the Bahamas constantly, and captains do this for wealthy owners all the time. So when you hear that captain drop that heavy curse word in pure shock, I only wish we could see their actual faces. I am certain their expressions were filled with absolute panic and deep concern that they had accidentally entangled themselves in a massive criminal investigation when they were just trying to earn a living doing an everyday job. But what an incredible cinematic moment on the water. After that dramatic video clip cuts out, the cameras stopped rolling, but that is the exact point where the Coast Guard hooked that heavy vessel up to their own ship and began a grueling 40-mile tow back to the shores of Florida. Let me tell you about that specific night. The ocean was completely angry. The weather conditions were brutal, and the storm they encountered was horrendous. I have been told by first-hand sources that it was easily some of the worst weather those specific Coast Guard members had ever navigated in their entire careers. And let's keep things in perspective here. These are highly trained Coast Guard professionals who routinely operate in the worst of the worst conditions the ocean can throw at them. The brutal weather severely impacted their transit and put an immense strain on their operational efforts. On top of the dangerous elements, there is a massive amount of legal and operational protocol that comes into play when federal agencies tow a foreign-flagged or recently intercepted vessel. You can't just blindly hook up a boat and drag it away without following the strict letter of the law. We have a Fourth Amendment in the United States Constitution that strictly protects against unreasonable search and seizure, and those constitutional protections absolutely apply to how the Coast Guard handles a vessel under these extraordinary circumstances. The Coast Guard cutter Winslow Greaser was the heavy vessel out there doing the dirty work, executing the massive task of towing that 46-foot sloop through treacherous seas back toward the mainland. As they finally approached Fort Pierce and needed to navigate the vessel safely into the marina, a much smaller, more agile Coast Guard boat came alongside Soulmate to tie it up tight. If you were watching my podcast a few episodes ago, you saw the exclusive footage we obtained of the Coast Guard hauling that boat right up against their own hull, carefully guiding it through the incredibly narrow inlet channel into Fort Pierce, and docking it securely at the Coast Guard station Fort Pierce. The sailboat sat parked there under heavy guard for several weeks until just recently, when we secured even more exclusive video showing that the vessel has now been moved down the coast to the Coast Guard station in Fort Lauderdale. The boat is being moved around a lot right now, and there is a very specific, calculated reason for that. Make no mistake about it, this vessel is an active, high-priority crime scene. The yellow crime scene tape officially went up the moment it hit the dock at Fort Pierce. We previously showed you the photographs of federal agents continuously walking on and off that boat, carrying out boxes of potential evidence, and meticulously bagging items on a specialized forensics table they set up right there on the shore. To me, that visual was incredibly telling. If this was all just a tragic, unforeseen accident where your wife supposedly bounced off the back of a dinghy during a freak incident, why on earth is your primary sailboat treated like a highly restricted federal crime scene? Why are forensic agents spends days carrying away bagged evidence? It is because law enforcement deeply believes that a major crime occurred directly on that boat, Brian Hooker. Now, I want to be very clear for legal reasons. I am not definitively stating as a matter of fact that Brian Hooker committed a crime. He has not been formally charged with anything yet. But the intense forensic movement on that boat speaks volumes. And if you tuned into yesterday's episode, you heard that the authorities have heavily nailed down some of the most critical digital forensic evidence you could possibly imagine in a case like this. They have recovered the precise GPS locations of Brian Hooker, which highlights what I can only describe as his sheer stupidity and cheapness. This man was apparently so cheap that he refused to get rid of a specific smartwatch, a watch that digital data suggests he was wearing while out on the water, potentially scouting out a good, remote place to dump something heavy into the ocean. If someone were trying to secretly dispose of a body, the recovered GPS tracking makes it look like he was out there late at night on a dinghy, circling two very specific, isolated coordinates on an anchor, instead of floating aimlessly with the wind over toward Marsh Harbor like he claimed in his official statement to the rescuers. Again, I am not saying he did this, and I am not saying he is charged, but if a person were hypothetically attempting to make a body disappear, this newly uncovered forensic data aligns perfectly with that dark theory. Instead of destroying the evidence, he kept the green watch that held all of this damning, highly precise digital breadcrumbs. He hid it away while proudly sporting a massive, flashy white watch in front of the cameras and the public, hoping everyone would look at his wrist and think he had nothing to hide. It is the exact same brand of arrogance and stupidity we saw with Brian Kohberger, who drove his own easily identifiable white sedan directly to a violent crime scene and thought he could evade the FBI just by turning his cell phone off and on. Brian Hooker seemed to truly believe he was the smartest guy in the room and that investigators would never look closely at his secondary electronics. He completely underestimated the dogged, relentless pursuit of the Coast Guard Investigative Service. They have been entirely on top of this job, and the legal noose is visibly tightening around him as his web of lies is systematically dismantled piece by piece. He left a glaring trail of digital popcorn, and AT&T's network tracking helped bust wide open the reality of where he actually was versus where he claimed to be. The deeper you look into the timeline, the worse it gets for his defense. On the exact same night that his small dinghy was tracked circling those two distinct deep water areas, we start to look at the geography of the Sea of Abaco. Some media outlets have been reporting that the water in those coordinates is 25 feet deep, but my direct sources have corrected that misinformation, stating it is closer to 15 feet. If you are trying to conceal something in 15 feet of water, you have to weight it down heavily so it never floats to the surface or becomes visible to passing boats. This brings us right back to the items that are mysteriously missing from the sailboat. Where is the heavy spare engine that used to be mounted on the boat? Where is Lynette's distinct pink weight belt that she used for diving? Where is her buoyancy compensation device with a recognizable pink trim? Investigators have noticed that these heavy-weighted pieces of gear are completely gone from the vessel. If someone were to go over the side of a boat in a tragic accident, they wouldn't be wearing a heavy diving weight belt and a BCD while casually riding in a dinghy. It completely contradicts the ridiculous story he fed to the authorities. Furthermore, we now know that the dinghy landed on the shores of Marsh Harbor twice that night between April 4th and April 5th. His original story claimed he was completely stranded without any mechanical propulsion, just floating helplessly with the wind and the tide until he randomly washed ashore. But ocean currents don't mysteriously pull a disabled watercraft into two entirely different landing spots miles apart. It is just another fabricated piece of garbage, he told to the police, the local investigators, and the heroic volunteers at the Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue who spent exhausting hours searching the open ocean for his missing wife. He put on a masterclass in staging a tragedy, crying out for help and claiming he barely survived washing up on the rocks. In reality, he landed in a completely different subdivision first. Local experts who know the rugged terrain on the ground have stated there is absolutely no way a person could physically machete their way through the razor-sharp thickets, deep black sludge, and dangerous waterways from his claimed landing spot to the houses where he allegedly knocked on doors looking for help. But if he landed at the first secret spot, the path to those houses becomes infinitely easier. It raises the terrifying possibility that he deliberately set a floating object adrift to see exactly where the wind would carry it, tracked it with his advanced mariner's watch, used his ultra-quiet electric trolling motor to drive directly to that spot, and staged his appearance. He claimed the keys to the dinghy went overboard with Lynette, which is why he supposedly had no propulsion, and conveniently, her entire dry bag containing the spare keys and vital passports vanished into thin air. It is highly probable that the dry bag was quietly disposed of in a residential garbage can during that first unrecorded landing, destined for an island landfill where trash is routinely burned, ensuring the evidence would be obliterated forever. He then traveled to the second location to play the part of the grieving, shipwrecked husband. He didn't anticipate that the digital data from his hidden watch would expose the exact physical movements of his watercraft down to the meter. He thought wearing his flashy white watch during his brief release from custody would fool the world, but the Coast Guard Investigative Service specializes in uncovering the devil in the details. Amidst all of this horrifying deception, there is one beautiful twist of fate that Brian Hooker never could have predicted. His calculated actions have ultimately brought Lynette's estranged family together in a powerful, unified front for justice. Just this past week, federal investigators met with Lynette's mother, Darlene, her father, Dan, and her courageous daughter, Carly Ellsworth, to officially collect their DNA samples. After providing their cheek swabs to the federal agents, the entire family group gathered together with their spouses and took a deeply emotional selfie. They have completely united to help solve this horrific mystery and bring their loved one home. Let's call this situation exactly what it is. This was absolutely not a tragic maritime accident. A vibrant woman does not simply bounce out of the back of a small boat and vanish without a trace while her husband floats away unscathed. The evidence is mounting, and everyone from my independent podcast to the federal agents of the Coast Guard Investigative Service and the local Bahamian police are working hand in hand to uncover the truth. The Bahamian authorities are granting full permission for American tactical dive teams to submerge and thoroughly search those exact deep water coordinates where the smartwatch caught him circling in the dark. If they locate Lynette's remains at the bottom of the Sea of Abaco, weighted down by the missing machinery, the authorities now possess the exact DNA profiles required to make an immediate, undeniable positive identification. The moment that forensic match is made, the handcuffs will come out, and the entire world will watch him get marched off to a prison cell. I want to thank every single one of you for listening to this breakdown and watching our coverage of this ongoing case. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, as it truly provides an immense amount of support to this independent podcast. Consider joining our exclusive membership group as well so you can stay entirely up to date as the final pieces of this investigation fall into place. I'm Ashley Banfield, and this is Drop Dead Serious, because the truth isn't just serious, it is drop dead serious.